Christmas used to mean something different to me. Growing up, it was the smell of my mom's cinnamon rolls in the morning, the sound of Nat King Cole playing softly from the record player, and my dad stringing lights on the front porch with a beer in hand, cursing under his breath whenever one went out. It was warmth. It was home. But this Christmas? It was cold. And I don't mean the weather. We were late to my cousin Dylan's annual family gathering in Savannah. Not just fashionably late, flat-out rude late. We'd left the house behind schedule because Brianna had taken forever getting ready. I don't usually mind that. I know how she likes to look her best for family events, and truthfully, I've always admired how she could walk into a room and turn heads without even trying. But tonight, there was something different about her preparation. She wasn't just dressing up, she was transforming. Layers of foundation, hair curled perfectly, a deep red lipstick I hadn't seen her wear in months. Even the dress, a slinky, wine-colored number, was one I didn't recognize. "Go on in without me," she said as I pulled into the driveway. "I just need a minute to finish up." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Not really." "You sure?" I asked, hand on the gear shift. She waved me off. "I'll be 5 minutes. Promise." So I got out, grabbed the 2 gifts we had brought for the white elephant exchange, some gag socks and a Bluetooth speaker, and headed around to the side door where the family usually came in. Dylan always left it unlocked. As I stepped into the foyer, something made me stop. There she was, Brianna, standing just a few feet ahead of me, facing the hallway mirror. She hadn't heard me come in. Her heels were off, her phone was in one hand, and she was using the other to adjust her dress, pulling it back up over one shoulder like she'd just... I don't know. Like she'd been disheveled. I took another step in and the door clicked softly shut behind me. She spun around instantly, startled. Her expression changed fast, too fast. From surprise to composure in the blink of an eye. "Oh," she said, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. "I was just texting your mom to let her know we made it." She slipped the phone into her clutch with practiced ease, smoothing her hair like I hadn't just caught her mid-rehearsal. And that's when it hit me. The smell. Not her usual perfume, the soft, floral scent she wore every day. No. This was something else. Muskier. Heavier. It was men's cologne. Not mine. Not anyone in our families either. Sharp. New. Like something out of a department store sample box. "What's that smell?" I asked. She blinked. "What smell?" I stepped forward, setting the gifts down by the wall. "Cologne. It's strong." She paused just long enough to make my skin crawl. "Oh, probably one of your uncles. They hugged me when I came in. You know how some of them practically bathe in aftershave." She laughed forced and waved a hand in the air like she could clear the scent, clear the moment. "You're imagining things, Ty," she added, looping her arm through mine. "Come on. They've been asking about us." I let her lead me into the living room, but my brain didn't follow. Something was off. I could feel it in the way she kept checking her phone during conversations, tilting the screen just slightly away from me. I could see it in the way her smile faded the moment people looked away. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Dinner was the usual chaos, too many people crammed around a table, too many inside jokes flying over the mashed potatoes. But even in the noise, I felt like I was drifting. Detached. I sat beside Brianna, trying to act normal. She talked, she laughed, she even fed me a bite of sweet potato casserole at one point like everything was fine. But I couldn't shake what I saw in the foyer. Or what I smelled. The cologne hadn't just brushed against her, it had clung to her like a shadow. No random hug from Uncle Frank could explain that. Then, halfway through dinner, someone asked me how work was going. I run a small design business, mostly repurposing office equipment for local startups. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and I've always been proud of what I've built. Before I could even open my mouth, Brianna cut in. "Oh, Tyler's latest project is fixing up old office chairs. He thinks he's the next Steve Jobs of lumbar support," she said, punctuating it with a smirk. The table erupted with laughter. Someone even clinked their glass in mock tribute. I stared down at my plate, jaw tight. That hurt more than I expected. Not because of the joke itself, people tease, I can take that, but because of the way she said it. Like I was small. Like I was a man she didn't respect. I didn't say anything. I didn't look at her. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out the car keys, and placed them on the table. "What are you doing?" my cousin Danielle asked. "Going for a walk," I said, standing up. "Ty, come on," Brianna said, her voice sharp now. "It was just a joke." I didn't respond. Didn't make a scene. I just walked out. Into the cold night. Into the darkness of a Savannah winter that suddenly felt more like a stranger than home. The air bit at my skin, but it felt better than the heat inside that room. I shoved my hands into my coatless pockets and kept walking. Past the stringlit porch. Past the familiar cars. Past the laughing silhouettes in the windows that now looked like shadows on a wall I didn't belong to anymore. That's when I realized something I'd been avoiding for months, maybe longer. I didn't recognize my own wife anymore. I thought back to all the little things I'd brushed off. Her sudden interest in late-night drives. Her reluctance to share her phone screen. The way she'd been so quick to dismiss me in conversations lately like I was just background noise. And now this. The way she looked in that mirror. The scent of another man trailing behind her like perfume. The jab at dinner. It wasn't just the cologne. It wasn't just the joke. It was everything. And maybe I'd known for a while. Maybe I just hadn't had the courage to look at it head on. Until now. Until this night. I kept walking, letting my breath fog the air as I moved through empty streets lined with Christmas lights and wreaths that didn't mean a damn thing anymore. I didn't know where I was going. But for the first time in a long time, I knew what I was walking away from. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to confront her. Not yet. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I drove with no real direction. Just kept the headlights pointed toward whatever stretch of winter road unfolded ahead of me. Town after town blurred past. A gas station here, a closed diner there. Every few miles, a Christmas display blinked from some front yard, mocking me with its cheer. The night swallowed my thoughts, but the silence? That's what cracked me open. With every mile, memories I'd shelved quietly, maybe even willingly, began to stir. It was like my mind had been waiting for permission to speak. Now that I'd walked out, it wouldn't shut up. The first thing that came back was her phone. A couple of weeks ago, I'd reached for it on the kitchen counter to check the weather. Innocent, automatic. She snatched it so fast, you'd think I'd pulled a knife. Oh, it's just work stuff, she'd said, too casual. I changed my password, some confidential client files. That should have been a red flag. But I'd nodded. Believed her. Then there were the trips. She'd started going to Atlanta more often in the past few months. Always something about regional meetings, networking, training sessions. She worked in marketing, there was always some new rollout or brand refresh she claimed needed her attention. At first, I was proud of her. Genuinely. She was smart, driven. I used to joke that she could sell sunscreen in a snowstorm. But the overnights became more frequent. Too frequent. She'd come back tired, sure, but energized in this strange, detached way. Like her body had returned, but her mind had stayed behind in some hotel room. And speaking of hotel rooms, I remembered that bracelet. It had been a couple of months ago. I was loading groceries into the trunk and saw it tucked between the spare tire and a yoga mat she never used. A sleek, silver men's bracelet. The kind that probably cost more than my car payment. Whose is this? I asked, holding it up. She barely blinked. Oh, that's probably Marcus's. He must have left it when I gave him a ride home from the office last week. Marcus. Some junior associate I'd never met. She said it like she was swatting a fly. At the time, I actually believed her. Told myself there was no reason not to. It's just a bracelet, right? But now I knew better. These weren't isolated incidents. They were fragments of a pattern scattered but clear as day once you laid them side by side. Like puzzle pieces that only made sense when you stopped pretending they didn't fit together. I started remembering how often she made me feel small. Not in obvious ways, she was too polished for that. It was more subtle. Like death by 1,000 cuts. She used to criticize how I dressed when we went out. You really wearing those shoes? She'd say with a laugh. Then she started rolling her eyes whenever I brought up work. You spend so much time on these side projects. Wouldn't it be easier to just get a steady job somewhere? Even when we FaceTimed with her family, she had this way of cutting me out of the conversation. She'd answer for me, talk over me, mute the mic if I said something that made her cringe. You don't really need to be part of this call, she'd once said, handing me a half smile that didn't hide her annoyance. I let it go every time. Told myself I was being sensitive. That I didn't need to make a big deal out of small things. But it wasn't small anymore. I pulled over at a rest stop just off I-75. K** led the engine and sat there in the cold silence. The heater ticked as it cooled down. My breath fogged up the windshield. The loneliness hit me like a truck. This wasn't about one night in Savannah. That was just the final crack in a dam that had been leaking for months, maybe longer. The worst part? I had let it happen. Maybe I'd known she was slipping away. Maybe I'd seen the signs. But I hadn't fought it. I'd stayed in my lane, played the good husband, the don't rock the boat guy. I thought if I gave her space, if I stayed steady, she'd come back. Instead, she drifted further. I started the car again and drove until the sun came up behind a line of Georgia pines. The sky turned a pale orange, the road ahead glowing just enough to see the frost melting off the asphalt. I hadn't slept. Didn't even feel tired. By mid-morning, I found myself in a tiny town I didn't recognize. Somewhere west of Macon, I think. I pulled into a parking lot beside an old church, climbed into the back seat, and closed my eyes for a bit. Sleep came, eventually. When I woke, my mouth was dry and my neck ached, but my head was clear in a way it hadn't been in months. I checked my phone, hesitated, then turned it off again. There were probably messages. Calls. Apologies. Excuses. I didn't want to hear them. Instead, I opened the Notes app and started typing. Just thoughts, freeform. Nothing poetic. Just facts. Things she said. Things she did. Things that made me doubt myself. I listed every moment I brushed off as harmless. Every comment that chipped away at my confidence. Every "you're overthinking it" she threw at me when I asked her something real. Reading it back, it was damning. Not dramatic, just honest. I don't think I realized until that moment how far I'd been pushed from my own identity. I used to be proud of who I was. Used to love tinkering in the garage, building oddball contraptions, playing guitar until midnight even if nobody was listening. Somewhere along the way I stopped. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think it mattered. She didn't see value in it, so neither did I. That realization hurt more than the bracelet. More than the phone password. More than the lingering cologne in the foyer. It meant I had been disappearing long before she started hiding things. I stepped out of the car, stretched, and breathed in the crisp December air. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn wailed. A reminder that the world keeps moving, even when yours comes to a screeching halt. For the first time in days, I didn't feel lost. I felt broken, sure, but also weirdly awake. Like I had opened a door inside myself I didn't know was locked. I got back in the car and started driving again, not toward home but away from it. Not toward her, but toward something else. Something that didn't exist yet but would. By the fourth morning, I'd driven across half the state. There was no destination, just a loose trail of roadside motels, gas station coffee, and radio static. I stayed mostly off the interstate, letting the back roads lead me through small towns and tree-lined highways where time seemed to move slower, quieter. Somewhere outside Rome, Georgia, I pulled into a budget motel wedged between a bait shop and a Dollar General. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s, green carpet, flickering neon vacancy sign, faded sign-in sheet at the front desk. But the clerk didn't ask questions, and that was all I needed. I paid in cash. Asked for a room with a window facing the woods. Once I got inside, I didn't bother unpacking. Just threw my bag on the bed and sat there, staring at the wall. I hadn't looked at my phone since the night I walked out. It had been off in my glove compartment, buried beneath old receipts and a half-eaten granola bar. But that morning something changed. I don't know if it was the silence, or the way the motel heater clicked and hummed like a dying animal. Or maybe it was just time. Time to stop avoiding the inevitable. I retrieved the phone and sat back on the edge of the bed. My thumb hovered over the power button for a long minute before I finally pressed it. The screen lit up. 32 missed calls. 11 voicemails. 4 texts from my mom. 1 from my brother asking if I was okay. But it was the first message at the top that stopped me cold. Brianna, 1 video message. No subject. No preview. Just a file name and a thumbnail frozen mid-motion. At first, I thought it might be a plea. Some teary apology, a message begging me to come home. I didn't want that. I wasn't ready for that. But curiosity is a cruel companion. I tapped it. The video loaded. There was no build-up, no title screen, no soft entry. It opened with laughter. Shaky camera movement. A woman's voice, Brianna's voice, off-screen. Tell him he still thinks I'm in Augusta. More laughter. Then the camera steadied just slightly. Enough to show a hotel room. Dim lighting. A bed in the background, rumpled and used. A mirror reflecting 2 figures, Brianna wearing black lace lingerie I'd never seen before, perched on the edge of the mattress, legs crossed like she was posing for someone. Beside her, a man I didn't recognize. Shirtless. Grinning. She turned her head toward the lens. He's probably sitting at home eating leftovers, she said, laughing again. Tyler's never gonna know. The camera cut off a few seconds later, like someone's thumb slipped over the stop button. That was it. Just 15 seconds. 15 seconds to set everything on fire. I sat there, phone in hand, motionless. The heater kept clicking. Outside, a crow screamed from a pine tree. But I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The betrayal wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't a hunch. It wasn't a scent. It wasn't a missing bracelet or a too casual lie. It had a face now. A voice. A timestamp. It lived in pixels and sound waves, undeniable and final. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My body just went still, like it had shut down everything non-essential. My brain, though? It didn't stop. It started rolling back the tape. Every moment, every word, every gut feeling I'd swallowed over the last 6 months. The time she came back from a trip and immediately showered, wouldn't kiss me first. The flinching when I touched her shoulder in the kitchen. The sudden obsession with privacy, phone face down, texts with no names, work emergencies at 10 p.m. The way she laughed less around me but smiled more at her screen. I'd told myself I was being paranoid. She'd told me I was being paranoid. But the truth was I wasn't blind. I was just scared to look too closely. Because once you admit it, you can't unsee it. Once you know, really know, the lie dissolves the foundation you thought your life was built on. I thought about calling her. I really did. I imagined what I'd say. I even picked the phone up twice. But both times I put it down. What was the point? I'd already heard the truth in her voice, in her laughter, in that damn hotel room. There was nothing left to ask. Instead, I watched the video again. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. I needed it to stick. I needed it to burn deep into my memory. No more second-guessing. No more benefit of the doubt. I needed the pain to have sharp edges. To leave no room for rewriting history later. After the second viewing, I deleted it. Not out of forgiveness. Out of survival. I didn't need it anymore. I lay back on the bed, stared at the popcorn ceiling, and waited for something: anger, grief, rage. What I got was stillness. Not peace exactly, but silence with a purpose. That afternoon, I sat at the tiny desk by the motel window and pulled out my notebook. The same one I'd kept in the glove box since college, where I used to jot lyrics and ideas for side projects. It had been untouched for years. I turned to a blank page and wrote. She laughed while breaking me. Then beneath that, don't ever forget how that sounded. I didn't write much more. I didn't need to. That line was enough. It carried all the weight I needed it to. Later, I walked across the street to a gas station and bought a pack of crackers, some instant coffee, and a lighter. I don't smoke, but something about holding fire felt important. I stood behind the motel, near the tree line, and stared at the lighter flame. It danced, flickered, fought the wind. It looked fragile, but it could burn through anything given the chance. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of pain, but out of clarity. This wasn't a breakup. It was an ending. The end of a version of me that stayed quiet. That played it safe. That made excuses for being sidelined in his own life. She hadn't just cheated. She'd rewritten the rules without telling me. And I'd been living in her version of the story for too long. Not anymore. I left the motel outside Rome the next morning, engine humming beneath a heavy sky. I didn't know exactly where I was heading, just that I couldn't turn around. The phone stayed off. There wasn't anything left in it I needed. My savings weren't much. A few thousand in a personal account she never touched. The rest, our shared bank, the credit cards, the auto-pay bills, I left untouched. She could have it. I didn't want a single dollar that had her fingerprints on it. That was the first rule I made for myself that week: start over with nothing. It wasn't about pride. It was about freedom. Around noon, I crossed the Alabama border, then dipped south into Mississippi before turning back toward Louisiana. I wasn't running. I was shedding old routes, old habits, old versions of me that no longer made sense. 3 days later, I pulled into Houston. I hadn't planned on it, but I remembered an old friend from college, Travis, who'd stayed in the city after graduation and opened a scooter repair shop on the east side. We hadn't talked in years. Not because of anything bad. Just life. I called him from a payphone. The kind you had to punch hard for the buttons to register. He picked up after 2 rings. "Ty," he said, like he wasn't sure I was real. "Yeah, it's me. You got room for a ghost to crash?" There was a pause. Then, always. He didn't ask why I was calling. Didn't ask what had happened. Just texted me an address and said to knock on the back door. That night, I parked behind his shop, Travis's garage, painted in fading red across a metal roll-up, and stared at the dusty trailer sitting a few yards away. It had one busted window, a crooked step, and smelled faintly like oil and old paint. It was perfect. He let me stay rent-free for the first month. "Pay me when you can," he said, shrugging, as if giving someone shelter wasn't a big deal. We set up an extension cord from the shop so I could have electricity. I used the bathroom inside and showered at the gym 2 blocks down. The second rule I made for myself: earn every step forward. At first, I slept 12 hours a day, like my body had stored years of exhaustion and finally decided it was safe to rest. When I was awake, I swept the shop, organized old bins of wires, clean G** and K off chains and axles. Travis fixed scooters, e-bikes, and the occasional wheelchair for veterans in the neighborhood. His customers came in limping, rolling, asking for help, and left with gratitude and a story to tell. One afternoon, I asked if I could help him with a rush job. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? I've built weirder things in my garage." He grinned. "All right then, Mr. Inventor. Let's see what you've got." He handed me the frame of an electric scooter. Wheels off, battery dead, handlebars loose, and said, "Kid wants this by Saturday." "What's the story?" 14-year-old, he said. Cerebral palsy. Can't use a regular bike, but he dreams about going fast. That night, I worked until 3 a.m., fabricated new grips with extra support. Replaced the battery with one pulled from an old delivery drone. Reinforced the frame with steel rods so it wouldn't tip if he leaned. By morning, I was grease-streaked, sleep-deprived, and buzzing. Travis wheeled the scooter out the next day. The kid was quiet at first, shy, almost afraid to hope. But when he took off down the alley, wobbling at first and then gliding, something cracked open in my chest. I hadn't felt that alive in years. After they left, Travis clapped me on the back. "You're hired, by the way." I told him I didn't need pay yet, just space. He nodded. "Then take that back corner. Make it yours." I cleaned it out that night. An old workbench, scattered parts, a busted laptop screen, and laid out my tools like a surgeon prepping for a new kind of operation. Third rule: build something that gives people more than it takes. The work started coming slowly. A neighbor needed a wheelchair ramp reinforced. A delivery guy asked if I could waterproof his e-bike for rainy season. I fixed a security guard's golf cart that wouldn't reverse. Word spread one favor at a time. People didn't just bring machines, they brought stories. One woman came in asking if I could fix her son's broken trike. He'd passed away 2 years earlier, but she wanted it restored as a memorial. Another man needed help getting his old moped running again. Not because he rode it, but because it belonged to his late brother. These weren't just repairs. They were acts of resurrection. And somehow, fixing their broken things started to fix something in me. At night, I sat in the trailer with a notebook in my lap and a pen in my hand. I didn't write much at first. Just ideas, sketches for a modular wheelchair, notes for a voice-controlled scooter, maybe even a repair guide written in plain language for kids. But one night, I wrote something else. A song. It started as a single line. "She left me in pieces, so I built something whole." The lyrics came slowly, raw, unpolished, but it felt good to use my voice again, even if no one would hear it. In my early 20s, I used to write music. Had a band in college that played bars and open mics. Nothing serious, nothing signed, but we had passion. I hadn't touched my guitar in years, but now I kept it by the side of the bed. Each night, a few more chords returned. Each morning, the trailer felt a little more like mine. I bought supplies from thrift stores, scavenged electronics from junkyards, asked customers to pay what they could, even if that meant trading home-cooked meals or garden vegetables instead of money. I wasn't chasing profit. I was chasing meaning, and somehow the city gave it back. Customers returned, not just for repairs, but for conversation. They stayed and asked if they could learn. I started teaching them simple tasks, how to patch a tire, how to change a fuse. Word got around. A local teacher dropped off her old classroom scooters and said, "Do whatever you want with them." So I started a workshop. I called it Fixing is Healing. Teens came. Single moms. Retired vets. People who had nothing in common except the need to rebuild. Every session, we fixed something, then talked. Not therapy, just connection. Over wires and grease, stories poured out, divorce, grief, job loss, burnout, dreams long buried. Nobody judged. Nobody asked why I was there. And I didn't offer the full story. Not yet. But every time I tightened a bolt or resoldered a wire, I felt a little less broken. I kept 3 rules written on the wall behind my bench. Start with nothing. Earn every step. Build to give. One evening, a teenage girl from the workshop, quiet, always wore headphones, came up to me and said, "I think your scooter shop saved my life." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and handed her a wrench. That night, I cried for the first time since I left Savannah. Not out of sorrow, but gratitude, because I finally saw it. I wasn't escaping anymore. I was becoming. 2 months after I built that first custom scooter, I looked up one morning and realized there was a line. Not a metaphorical one. An actual, physical line, 3 people outside the garage door waiting with bikes and carts and half-broken mobility chairs. No flyers. No ads. Just stories passed from neighbor to neighbor like a local legend slowly growing legs. That day, I fixed an elderly man's power chair motor, repaired a mail carrier's busted wheel, and rewired the throttle on a student's second-hand scooter all before lunch. And I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt useful. There's something sacred in being trusted with broken things. Not just objects, but people. A young woman brought in a scooter her ex had smashed during an argument. She stood there the whole time I worked, arms crossed like she was afraid I might judge her. I didn't. I just listened while she talked about leaving, about starting over, about trying to feel strong again. I didn't have the right words. So I handed her the scooter, perfectly repaired, and said, "Next time it breaks, you'll know how to fix it yourself." She nodded. And smiled. And for a second, I swear I saw the exact moment she believed it. Soon, I wasn't just fixing things, I was teaching. I set up folding tables, salvage tools, and turned that dusty back corner of the garage into a learning station. Saturday afternoons became unofficial open shop hours. We didn't call it class because no one came for grades. They came because it felt like somewhere to breathe. That's when I gave it a name. Fixing is healing. It wasn't catchy, but it was honest. Teenagers who were skipping school showed up to solder battery lines. A single dad learned how to patch tires so he could start his own delivery gig. A grandmother brought her grandson's scooter to repair and stayed to rebuild a second one for another kid who didn't have one. People weren't just repairing machines. They were stitching themselves back together. And me? I started to feel whole. I painted over the old garage walls, replaced the rusted signage, built shelves out of reclaimed pallets, bought a cheap website domain and set up a message board so people could ask questions, request parts, or just say thank you. Every evening, I walked back to the trailer, sat on the steps with a lukewarm coffee, and watched the sun set behind a mess of electrical lines and rooftops. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. Not to Brianna. Not to the family who hadn't heard from me in weeks. Not even to myself. I didn't need validation. I needed motion. I needed purpose. One day, Travis walked into the shop with a stack of mail. "Someone's been busy," he said, tossing the envelopes onto my workbench. Most of them were bills, a few community newsletters, and one from a local high school. The return address caught my eye. I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter from Ms. Aranda, a teacher I'd never met. She'd heard about the workshop from one of her students, Jamal, a quiet kid who barely spoke in class but apparently came to life talking about Tyler's garage. She wrote, "Whatever you're doing, it's working. I've seen more engagement, more confidence, more joy in these kids than I've seen all year. Thank you for giving them a space to matter." There was a gift card taped to the bottom. $25 to a pizza place. It felt like a trophy. The letter sat pinned to the wall for weeks. Every time I looked at it, something inside me straightened its spine. Respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. And sometimes, the people who hand it to you aren't wearing suits or giving speeches, they're teenagers covered in grease and elders who trust you with their independence. I started writing again. Not just songs. Journal entries. Ideas. Dreams. I'd scribble on scraps of cardboard or on the inside flaps of delivery boxes. One night, I wrote, "I'm not broken. I just needed a new set of tools." I didn't know if anyone would read these things, but I kept writing. Kept building. A community center heard about the workshop and offered to partner on a small grant. We got a few refurbished bikes and a closet to store parts. Someone from the local paper showed up, asked if they could do a short piece. I almost said no. But then I thought about all the people who found this place not because it was advertised, but because someone saw them and said, "You belong here." So I said yes. The article ran the following week under the title, "The Man Who Repairs More Than Machines." I thought it was a bit much, but people read it. A local veteran stopped by the next day. He didn't have a bike or a scooter. He just sat on the bench outside and said, "Mind if I just watch y'all work for a bit?" I said, "You can do more than watch. Here, hold this wrench." He came back every day that week. Others followed. Not all of them fixed things. Some just drank coffee and told stories. Some played music from their phones while the kids soldered. Some dropped off tools they no longer needed. It became a rhythm, a ritual, a kind of healing that no one could define, but everyone recognized. I never posted about Brianna, never mentioned her name in interviews or on the workshop page. But there were moments, quiet ones, where I'd feel her shadow on the edge of my memory, and I'd smile, not out of spite, but because I realized something important. She didn't just break my heart. She freed it from the pressure of being someone I wasn't, freed it from shrinking to fit inside a relationship that made me feel small. She made room for this, not by kindness, but by absence. I still don't know where she is, whether she's moved on, whether she thinks about me, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that I don't feel small anymore. I feel solid, whole, capable. The trailer behind the shop still creaks when the wind hits just right. Still smells like paint and damp socks. But I wake up each day without dread. I wake up with grease under my nails, ideas in my head, and people outside waiting not for perfection, but for presence. Sometimes at night, I close up the shop and take a walk around the block. It's not scenic. There's trash in the gutters, stray cats fighting in alleyways. But I like it here, because it's honest, because it's mine, because every corner of this place holds something I earned, not something I begged for, not love built on performance, not loyalty held hostage by guilt, but respect, earned, not inherited. It was a Friday in late June when I saw her again. Brianna, standing outside the garage, arms crossed, wearing a beige designer coat that didn't belong in this part of town. She looked smaller, not physically, something else, worn down, like life had caught up with her. I stepped outside, wiping grease from my hands. She asked if we could talk. I didn't yell, didn't ask why she came. Just let her sit in the back corner of the shop while I kept working. I told her what the last 6 months had been, what I'd built, who I'd become. She said she was sorry, said everything had fallen apart after I left. I nodded, told her I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't hers anymore either. She reached for my hand. I didn't move. She left without a hug, without tears, just silence and understanding. A year passed. The workshop became something bigger than I ever imagined. Weekly classes, tool donations, people dropping by just to feel human again. We built things together. We rebuilt ourselves. A local news station featured our story. I gave a talk at a regional startup summit. They called me a community innovator. Funny, I used to be a guy fixing chairs in a garage. My sister visited and asked me if I ever regretted walking out that night in Savannah. I smiled, told her the truth. My only regret was not doing it sooner. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you needed to find out what you're truly made of. And I'm good with that. I'm good with all of it. Peace doesn't come with answers. It comes with choosing yourself and meaning it